Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to December's or JTEEN's December webinar. One of those orders, I guess it goes into. My name is Erica Harubi, and I'm the Executive Director of JTEEN. I'm so excited to see you here today. Thank you all for joining in. Just a couple of quick notes before we head into our webinar today. So JTEEN, as you may or may not know, JTEEN's mission is to serve as a national organization of Jewish teen education and engagement professionals, networking to strengthen knowledge and skills, engage innovation, encourage innovation, and engage with innovation, develop and share curriculum and resources, and positively impact Jewish teen life in the 21st century. So thank you all for being here in support of our work. We are all colleagues, and these are opportunities for us to connect and learn together and hopefully stay connected as we move forward. I wanted to tell you real quick about a new initiative that JTEEN is launching in January. We're launching a brand new online networking conversations starting next month. The new initiative creates an informal virtual space for youth professionals in similar roles to engage in more niche conversations with colleagues across the country for idea and resource sharing, collaboration, support, and much more. I'm excited to say that we already have 34 professionals who have completed the registration form to let us know that they're interested. There is no fee, so don't worry, it's completely free. If you're interested, I'm going to put the form in the chat. Feel free to click on that form and fill it out, and more information will be coming after the first of the year. So thank you all for being here today. You didn't come for the introductions, you came for the webinar. And today we are going to, I'm excited to let you know that we're doing a webinar that we have entitled Belonging in Action, Affirming Trans and Gender Expansive Identities Among Teens. I'm excited that this webinar is being facilitated by some of my favorite people who I've known for a little while and have also gotten to know over the last little bit. They come from two incredible organizations that if you don't know about them, definitely need to know about them. One is Keshet and the other is Moving Traditions, and I know that they will share their information with you as well. So Amram or Ami Altsman from Keshet. Ami is the Associate Director of Youth Programs. Jamie Krass from Keshet is the Director of Youth Programs. And Alicia Pedowitz from Moving Traditions is the Director of Teen Education. Without further ado, I will stop talking and turn it over to our presenters. Thank you all.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here today, along with Ami and Jamie, for our two organizations to share with all of you. Very excited to see many folks I know, and there's also folks I don't know. So I'm going to ask, just by way of introduction and also to frame a bit of what we're doing and talking about today. In just a moment, I'm going to put this in the chat as well, but I'm going to ask you to share in the chat. I know many of you already changed your names on your Zoom screen to include your pronouns in your organization, but if you could put in the chat your organization, role, and a time when you felt misunderstood or invisible. And as your responses to that start coming in, I just want to say a bit about why we're here, and just say a little bit further about myself and Moving Traditions. Again, I'm the Director of Teen Education, and one of our programs at Moving Traditions is our XLM program for trans and non-binary youth, creating affinity spaces, which we developed in partnership with Keshet, for trans and non-binary youth in Jewish institutions across the country. And over the last couple of years, we have seen a growth and a need for that program, teens showing up for that program, wanting that space. And so we have really been learning from that. Much of what from our side of things we'll share today. I'm also the mom of 2 teen boys, a 13-year-old and a turning 15-year-old. My 13-year-old came out as trans during the pandemic. And so I have been lucky to be learning from the work that we're all doing, applying it in action and vice versa. Thank you all for putting in the chat a time where you felt misunderstood or invisible. And I will also add something to think about. You can add with that what it felt like. Perhaps you advocated for yourself. And if so, how did that go? You didn't advocate for yourself. Why? Feel free to put a couple of sentences describing this situation where you felt misunderstood or invisible. I'm already seeing a couple come in, needing to remind close friends or colleagues of my pronouns, a time feeling invisible. Someone else said more often than I care to admit. So many situations, perhaps personally and or professionally, where feeling like who you are isn't seen fully or understood due to fear of repercussion, gaslighting, summer camp, struggling to find my place. Thank you. In the military. And I just got a message that people are having trouble hearing me. Is this any better? Do I need to repeat any of what I just said? Did it come through enough? Okay, thanks. Thank you, Stacy, for the message. My colleague, Stacy Shapiro. Okay, lots of times that people can relate to feeling misunderstood or invisible when trying to build friendships and community in new places. This is a feeling that most of us have experienced one time or another in our lives. And one of the reasons that we wanted to open is grounding in this idea that what we're talking about today, when we talk about ways to affirm trans and non-binary youth, we're fundamentally talking about the sacred work that we do as educators all the time of making sure young people are seen and appreciated and feel they're seen and appreciated for who they are fully. We know there's so many different ways that doesn't happen for them. And in particular, trans, non-binary, gender expansive youth living in a world that assumes people are cisgendered, that feeling can be amplified even more so. And this is our why for our session today. We're here to see people support teens and youth, affirm them for who they are. We know that has critical importance in their development, in their lives. And that's why we're here, even as we kind of get into the nitty gritty of what that might look like. And on that note, I want to share with you a video. This is a TED Talk by a neuropsychologist, Lyra Boroditsky, called How Languages Shape the Way We Think. And part of the session today is about language, right? How and why is language a critical part of this affirming, supporting, helping people feel they are seen for who they are? Thank you. One of the colleagues here on the chat even mentioned that when their pronouns are not used properly, that's a moment right there of not being seen. That's exactly what we're talking about. And for all of us on this call of a certain generation, we're also finding ourselves having to use language that perhaps we're not automatically comfortable with. And so let's dive into what that means and why. Let me just share my screen.
Counting, but folks who don't have that linguistic trick can't.
Oh, sorry. Hang on, let's skip that ad. Whoops. Okay, I would love to hear any takeaways people have from this clip, anything that surprised you that this neuropsychologist was saying about how language impacts the way we see the world. Feel free to come off mute, say your takeaways out loud, or put them in the chat. Anything that surprised you about what Leo Boroditsky was saying?
Okay.
Yeah, Shara.
I thought that it was super interesting. I wasn't completely surprised. But also I think that that can be very indicative of like if people are perceiving objects with these traits just based on how the objects are gendered, like what are people thinking about humans based on their pronouns, especially if they're locked into kind of a binary look at gender.
Thank you. Yeah, and that binary look at gender, right, has only been reinforced because the language system that we use has male, female, right? So the more we use that, the more it even impacts us just thinking in binary terms and thinking about gender binary. In the chat, someone just said that I wonder what happens in Greek, which also has a neutral gender as well as male and female, perhaps also German. Yeah, that was one of the things that she was saying, that when there are more words for different genders or even color, right, people have an easier time with the association. Any other thoughts that are jumping out at you from
I think English is a non-gendered language, so but a lot of, and she was talking about how like people, language speakers who do not speak a language that has those gender terms for objects are able to more quickly describe things. If I was hearing what she was saying correctly, I think that's a really interesting approach, because especially in English, there are specific objects that people instinctually associate with one gender or another, even if they are not, we do not have the language for it. So I think there's just so I'm so sorry. I just lost my train of thought. I think it's a really interesting way to approach things, because these languages that have those gender terms has that differentiation built into it, but English, which doesn't have that, we have unconsciously done that with things.
Thank you very much. And Danny, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to use that to just segue into kind of wrapping this part up, which is to say exactly, right? We are influenced by the language we have used. And in many ways, one way that we can think about expansive gender identity, and for those of us of a certain generation who are finding ourselves struggling with the language, right? Young folks are attempting to expand our language system. Our systems that we use help us make meaning of the world around us. And basically that system is not fully encompassing of all of the various gender identities, yet it's the system that our brains have been trained to understand gender. And if we can look at that in that way and give ourselves permission to first just understand with our hearts that we want to show up for the young people and show that we see them for who they are, even as our brains are relearning pathways and trying to catch up, that in and of itself is one of the most important steps for educators and adults to take. And the truth is, as this kind of showed, trans folks have been expanding language for a very long time. Only right now are we seeing this kind of moment culturally where there's a real conversation about language and expanding it, but that truth, that reality has been there. On that note, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, Ami and Jamie at Keshet, to talk a little bit more about how we can then put into practice with our hearts, right? Showing up with our hearts.
Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is this part will be we'll be using some visual assist, so in the form of Google Slides, to really just kind of help supplement us diving a little bit more deeply into language, and with the goal of all of us just feeling more equipped and empowered to navigate different kinds of conversations and really showing up for the people who are in front of us. But first, I'll share a quick little bit about Keshet, in case this is anyone's first time interacting with folks from Keshet, which would be really, really exciting. So Keshet is a national organization that works for the full equality of LGBTQ Jews and our families in Jewish life, and that takes on three main programmatic shapes. One is community mobilization, so that can look like grassroots to national campaigns that are all about forwarding LGBTQ plus rights. Another is education and training. So if you are part of a community that you feel like would really benefit and just enjoy diving deeper into this work and learning how to foster even more strongly a community of belonging for LGBTQ folks, you'd bring in our professionals, and we'd be more than happy to meet you at the table, and we'll go on a journey together towards becoming more affirming communities. And then the third and favorite is the one that Ami and I both work on, as well as several other members that you can't see right now of our team who are in the office with me, and that is youth programs. So throughout the year, we work with about 1,200 different youth through a variety of collaborations, co-hosted programs, and online as well as in-person offerings for LGBTQ Jewish youth to just be in community together and just sort of celebrate the sacred joy that we can find in affinity space. So if you have any questions, please do not feel free to follow. Do feel free. Do not hesitate. That's the two phrases I combined together in the least liberating way possible to follow up with us, and we'd be more than happy to chit chat. All right, so I'm going to quickly share my screen here. And I do want to make sure that everyone can see what I'm seeing. So do you see a screen that says belonging in action, affirming trans and gender expansive identities? Okay, fabulous. Thank you for the thumbs up from you, Danny. One of the worst parts is, as we all know, of sharing your screen means you can only see at a given moment 3 or 4 people. So visual cues, or better yet, unmuting and giving me some cues that way are most helpful. And questions throughout this part of our time together are most encouraged, whether in the chat. I'll be counting on Alicia and Ami to be the fabulous moderators to kind of help keep an eye on the chat, or unmuting, or using the raise hand function, which will bump you up to the top of my screen. All right, so together, we're first going to, don't worry, we already did this part of our journey together. All right, we're just going to do a quick review of some basic terms and concepts when it comes to LGBTQ identity and just human identity overall. So at Keshet, we think of these, this is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but it can feel nice and accessible when we have such precious time together. So 3 axes of identity here. We have sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, gender identity. And where we find this out in the world, that there can often just be a lot of confusion that happens for different folks about understanding these. So that's why we took this approach of really trying to dive into this. So sex assigned at birth is really just a category assigned by typically a medical professional, and it's usually assigned at or sometimes before via ultrasound based on physical characteristics. So typically we're talking about external genitalia. A doctor essentially, as we all know, looks at these characteristics and says, I'm going to put this human in the female category or the male category. We also obviously know that female and male are not the only 2 categories and the only 2 ways to understand these characteristics about ourselves. Intersex is also very much a legitimate category, a way of understanding ourselves. So even that notion of there being a sort of scientific binary there is really not an accurate portrayal of the human experience. And most sort of studies out there indicate that being intersex is as common as redheadedness. So we're also not talking about the tiniest minority of human experience either. I'm going to just move the slide a little bit further so that we can see. Sorry, my keyboard seems to not be working. So we can have some terms up here. So sexual orientation, this is what we're talking about, someone, whether it's their romantic, physical, sexual attraction to other folks. It's experienced by us inside or no attraction whatsoever. That's when we're referring to sexual orientation. Gender identity is our internal sense of knowing, of our relationship with gender. It is something that cannot be externally understood or externally projected onto someone or externally labeled. It is something that only we know. I like to say that it's something we know, or maybe we don't know right now, or maybe we're coming into a sense of knowing in our kishkes, inside of who we are. There's a lot of terms up on this screen right now. And so I also want to take a pause for you to read through, and feel free to share if you have any questions about any of these terms. In our more in-depth trainings, we will often run through every single one. And we know that we're here really to prioritize thinking about using language in our own spaces. So we want to meet you where you're at. And so a bigger part of our session together will actually be us creating space for that. So Any questions, even just looking for, so first looking at the right side of the axes about sex assigned at birth or about sexual orientation. Are there any questions about these terms or terms that are feeling perhaps a little unfamiliar that you'd like us to share a little bit more about? A colleague offered me a keyboard because my keyboard's not cooperating. Okay, I don't think I'm seeing anything in the chat. Fabulous. So a couple of little pieces that I'd love to share because it's something that brings us a lot of joy when we think about it. So the word queer, which you can see manifests in different forms on both underneath sexual orientation as well as gender identity, along with you see gender queer under there. So when we use the word queer, it's intentionally in both of these sort of sides of the triangle, and that's because queer is a word that is fundamentally about defying characterization and limitations. It means something different to each person who uses it. And so some things to keep in mind about it are, for some folks, it's used to describe identities that cannot be captured by a single one of these other terms that are here on the screen. It may reflect complexity, both in terms of gender identity and in terms of orientation. And for others, it is purely about sexual orientation. For some, it reflects a particular political or ideological approach to gender and or sexuality, usually related to critiquing or resisting the systems of power and expectations that have been woven into gender and sexuality. Of course, very dependent on the cultural context in which we find ourselves and in which we are functioning. Some use it as an umbrella term for everyone who is not cis and straight. And at Keshet, we don't often recommend this because queer has a loaded history as a reclaimed word. It has its origins as a slur, and there's real pain associated with it for many people. Others find it really empowering to reclaim this word. So it's important to just respect the autonomy and identities of folks and use only the words that other folks are using to describe their own identities. So that was that piece. Any question, now that we've had a little bit more time also with these axes in front of us, any questions that have come up about any of the terms that are on this screen? Does anything feel new? Or are there terms up here that we know that this is very much not a comprehensive list? Any terms that you would add to the three axes? See someone writing the difference between gender queer and gender fluid. Thank you so much, Danielle, for asking. So when we see the word fluid attached to words, now, of course, every word means whatever it means to the person who's using it, right? But one of the ways that we understand it is fluid. The word fluid indicates a sort of movement that is going on in terms of one's gender identity. So that might manifest as someone feeling that they identify as or with a particular gender identity in particular moments, contexts at different times in their life, or that there is fluidity between gender identities for them that they experience. Gender queer, some folks use these interchangeably for themselves. A lot of folks don't. Gender queer, with queer being that word that means sort of fundamentally defying categorization and limitations. This might be a gender identity that defies the other identities that are here listed under gender identity, that defies the other sort of definitions of whether it's man, woman, what it means to be trans or non-binary. You'll often also hear folks sometimes refer to themselves as multiple gender identities, as both trans and non-binary, or as both trans and gender fluid. That's also, it's really all about like what language really helps you feel like you are deepening and sharing your sense of knowing of who you are. How is gender fluid different from bisexual? Thank you so much, Susan. So with bisexuality, first I'll explain a little bit about what bisexual is, because sometimes folks will also be wondering about bisexuality and pansexuality. If someone's bisexual or pansexual, or someone identifies as both. So both refer to experiencing attraction to more than one gender of people. Because there are more than two genders, some people prefer the term pansexual, with pan meaning all, over bisexual with the prefix bi meaning two. However, plenty of bisexual people consider this awareness to already be part of their understanding of what it means to be bi, with bi then meaning genders like my own and genders not like my own. So the difference between bisexual and gender fluid, bisexual is really about your orientation. It's to whom you feel romantic, physical, sexual attraction. So someone who is bisexual would feel attraction to as I mentioned, either genders like their own and genders not like their own. And then someone who is gender fluid, that's about their gender identity. So the genders with like that they identify with, if they're gender fluid, like there's fluidity there. That gender, that there's movement around when and how and like what their gender identity sort of means to them. So one is about gender identity, and that's just your own sense of knowing and your relationship with gender. And bisexuality is about sexual orientation. It's about that sort of attraction that you feel towards other people or that you do not feel towards anyone. Any other questions? And of course, if anything comes up, please feel free to ask it of us. And also, Susan, I can't see you. So did that feel like it helped make a little bit more of a distinction between those two? All right, wonderful.
Yes,
So,
thank you. Yes,
thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so now we're taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some terms specifically related to gender. So gender identity, as I mentioned, is a person's inner self-knowledge and understanding of the genders with which they identify. Gender expression is the manner in which we outwardly express or signal or perform our gender. So this can encompass clothing, haircut, makeup, behavior, mannerisms, different ways of speaking. And of course, all of this we know is very much dependent on, like I mentioned before, cultural context, who we are, how we're socialized, just the ways that we are learning and moving through this world. So even this is not so much, there's a lot of movement and fluidity there too. Gender roles and stereotypes are also these culturally specific expectations, pressures, assumptions related to gender that are imposed on folks who are in that culture. And gender attribution, a process by which a person perceives another and uses their own assumptions, past experiences, or that cultural context to sort of guess which gender that person holds. Attributions made this way cannot be assumed to be accurate. So I'm gonna, this is one of my favorite visual assists, because here we have in the center gender identity, that internal sense of knowing, gender expression, how you express that self-knowledge outwardly, gender roles and stereotypes, totally outside of your gender identity and gender expression. This is something that exists within that societal context in which you live, that are imposed on you. And gender attribution, when other folks, whether it's they're seeing you, hearing you, some form of external perception, they are making assumptions about your gender identity. I really appreciated the comments that were shared earlier about the fabulous TED Talk that Alicia shared, just about how if folks are so easily attributing femininity or masculinity to an object based on the language, how easy is it to fall into that pattern of doing the same thing with people? And this is where a lot of harm actually really takes place, is those drawing on those assumptions that we might be feeling on the inside about another person, and thus erasing them and erasing who they actually are. I'm gonna pause to check in, and I will make sure I scroll through the screen on a scale of like 1 to 5, and you can hold up fingers or you can put this in the chat. How familiar, acquainted do you feel with the terms that we just covered about sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, and gender identity? Just 1 through 5, either with your hands or in the chat. With 1 being like, I'm just starting out, it's feeling very, very unfamiliar, but I'm excited to grow. 5 feeling, I'm feeling quite familiar. Great. All right, I'm seeing some numbers come up in the chat. Fantastic. And I'm seeing a lot of hands. Amazing. Thank you so much. We're almost done scrolling through. Wow, there's so many of you here. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm sensing a lot of confidence and comfort, and that's wonderful, because this is exactly what we need to be feeling to really be able to show up for young folks in our lives. And one of the best ways to do that is for us to just feel like we are acquainted with language, so that we can then use that language to guide how we affirm others. Wonderful. I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything in the chat. Fantastic. And we will also find a way to disseminate to you a pretty comprehensive list of LGBTQ terminology through a Keshet resource that we have, that can also just serve as a refresher, or if you want to bring it to the table with anyone else you feel would love to refresh their sense of knowing these terms with you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about sort of diversity within the trans community. What we mean by that is, again, this is all about really exploring the language that we can be using just to understand and to really be there for the folks in front of us, ensuring that I feel like the more equipped we are, the more sort of sophisticated and understanding and compassionate we can just be as human beings in general. So for starters, the concept of transitioning is something that comes up a lot in so many different conversations, and sometimes in ways that can be kind of harmful when someone asks someone that they know is trans what their relationship with transitioning is. So something we love to point out is that there isn't one correct way to transition. Not everyone wants to or feels like that would be an affirming experience for them. And the things folks do to affirm their gender identity varies over time. And so it's entirely individual per the person. And there isn't a correct way to look, act, or be queer and or trans. There is not notion of there being a sort of end goal towards which everyone should be aspiring. It's really about all of us being on our own journey. So life itself is a journey and not a destination. And that's the exact same with one's experience with their gender. So instead of thinking about it as this graphic, as this graph on the left here of this idea that there is a journey, we are on it, there is a clear path, and we know what that looks like for every person, it is way more like this. And I'd love to see any visual or in the chat indicators. How much does this also apply to every single aspect of all of our lives? So little is actually is clear and linear and formulaic. And thank goodness it is, because learning is not at all what happens here. Learning is what happens here. And really growing and connecting is what happens here in all these curves and loops and going backwards and all topsy-turvy and all around. That's what that is the journey of adolescence. That is the journey of life at every stage. So some folks prefer not to use the term transition because it implies that they're moving from point A to point B, like on that graph, that idea that there is a clear linear path on a set course, when instead they might just actually be simply taking steps to affirm the gender they've been all along, or not taking steps, because it could be that steps is not what feels affirming or necessary, to just be and live authentically as oneself. So all of these are valid ways of expressing one's experience. Here are some different ways that at any given time we might hear folks talking about transitioning or feeling affirmed, affirmation. So to medically transition or medically affirm, that might entail hormone replacement therapy, that might entail gender affirmation surgery, that might entail hormone blockers. To socially transition or be socially affirmed, choosing a name that affirms one's identity, choosing pronouns that affirms one's identity, and perhaps bringing others into that knowing of that name and those pronouns. To legally transition or to legally affirm one's gender identity might entail changing one's name on legal documents or changing the gender marker on your legal documents in select states where this is a possibility. There are still many states where this is not a possibility. So this is like some different kinds of angles of experiencing, whether that's like going on a journey of like transition or affirmation for your gender identity, or again, like that journey towards affirmation does not always look like any of these three too, or a combination or none of them. It's a lot, and we encourage everyone to just try not to get too caught up in the different terms. Instead, what's most important is that we focus on the person who is in front of us. That is really, at the end of the day, what matters most, is how we treat folks, the language that we use to affirm, being able to own when we make mistakes and kind of course correct ourselves, and just always be engaging in that learning mindset. Something that I love to say about all these sessions is we will never have enough time to get to everything. So we always say prepare for non-closure. And how beautiful is that there is no close on this work and that there is no end to this work. So as we think more about what are the ways that we as individuals, as educators, can affirm LGBTQ youth that we're working with, I'm going to toss it over to my fabulous colleague, Ami, to carry us forward.
Hello. So we spend a lot of time now just like talking through a lot of different terms and concepts. And I think that something that is really important is that Alicia and Jamie and I have a lot of knowledge and expertise, but there's also so much other knowledge and expertise here for all of you. And what we really want to do for the next 14 and a half or so minutes is really have time to really share wisdom and experience, and also have a time to share both like what feels hard or stressful or challenging, but also like things that have happened or come up in your communities, in the places where you work, professional and in your professional lives, that feel relevant in terms of like, what are things that teens are thinking about in terms of gender or sexuality that have come up that you have questions about, but also, and like what that you might not know the answers to. But also like, what are things that have happened over the course of the last few months or years as we have continued to evolve in our understanding of gender and sexuality and continue to grow our lexicon and our understanding that this is so much more expansive, that like has helped you and has helped you grow and be more affirming and welcoming, and to really turn this into a conversation. So I'm actually going to be doing less talking because I'd love to hear questions or things from all of you.
I'll kick it off, Ami. Not necessarily in my JTEEN work, but I also do work with parent and teen education and coaching. And one of the things that I hear or that I've heard in the past is the challenges that young people have in helping their parents understand gender, understand gender expression and gender identity, and the difference between sex and gender, and the challenges that they have, like forget like introducing themselves or engaging with the world in a bigger way, but even like for those most close to them, that they're struggling with parents who may not understand who they are, what they're feeling, or what they're experiencing.
And I think that's something that I'm hearing a little bit, and that I often think about a lot, is like, how do we as adults in these moments create spaces where we can all have those conversations between us, so that way we can focus in those moments on helping teens or young people who are struggling with their own with this stuff as well, right? And like, there's an incredible role that we can play in terms of creating classroom environments where people's pronouns or respective people's identities are treated with like the full dignity that. But there is also something that's really powerful about adults being able to do this for ourselves. And that's part of why we're doing this today, is to be able to say, like, here are spaces where we can kind of hold each other and kind of give each other the space that we need to ask questions to discuss this stuff. So that way, when we need to go back out and do this work with the teens and the young people in our lives, we have at least some of the answers, or at least we understand, like, here's what we know and here's what we don't know. Here's how the ways in which like our understandings of gender and sexuality are very different than like those several years or many years younger than we are. I think that's something that's really important. Alicia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I'm gonna put something in the chat. It's a
I can share it on the screen, Alicia, if you'd like.
oh, sure, that'd be great. Although I wanted to put a link as well for people to go to. Yeah, so what is being shared actually comes from the link I'm putting in the chat. We did a webinar on this back in April, and the link that I'm putting in has the recording, and there's this great conversation between parent Lauren and her young adult child Lane, kind of back and forth about this very thing that Ami raises, where Lauren says in this recording that I put on there that there was a moment that she realized that like her own understandings of gender and gender identity were still growing and changing. But as she was looking at Lane, her child sitting across from her, that she needed to just kind of say, like, my brain might not be caught up and I can do that work on my own later. But what I want to do is show Lane that my heart is right here with them. And one of the ways to do that is ask a lot of questions and just understand, who are you and what is it that you want me to know about you in this moment? And what's on the screen, we actually, from our TELM program I mentioned, asked some of the gender expansive youth in that program questions that you wish parents, or that parents could ask you about your gender identity and why. And this is in the, it'll be part of the resources we share also, it's in the link, but here's some great questions. Again, the idea of just questions, asking and listening, and then us later then being able to be like, what questions do we have and where can I seek information to answer for myself as my brain catches up? But these questions are just about listening to the person sitting right in front of me.
Where else, when it comes to affirming the youth that we're working with, are folks feeling any sort of energy, stress, questions, places of learning? Deborah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to respond. Can you hear me okay? I wanted to respond to the screen share there. And what I appreciated by those questions is that they weren't about like, tell me when you knew, tell me why you wanted. It's really about like just seeing the person. And I would like to have those in my back pocket. So thank you for sharing those, Alicia, because it is such a good reminder of of looking at the human who's talking to you and not about trying to figure out all of the whys around their journey, but just accepting them. And I also saw there was a link there to dead names. What should I do if someone misgenders or dead names you? And it's the first time I've heard that term. I'm assuming that's if somebody was originally named Joanna and now wants to go by Joe. And calls the wrong name. Is that the term for when someone dead names you?
Yeah, so different, like a lot of things, like we are still in what my spouse often refers to as the throwing spaghetti at the fridge stage of understanding gender and sexuality. And this is one of those things where some people use the term dead name to refer to the name that they no longer use. Some people also use the word like birth name or legal name, if that's still their legal name or things like that. And so that, yeah, so you're exactly correct. And sometimes some people have a very strong reaction to that term, and so use the word dead name to kind of convey like how negatively they feel toward it, and other people don't as much and use the term like birth name or given name or something like that. Deb, I want to also go back to something that you were saying before, and Julie, you put this in the chat. I was wondering if you can share a little bit more about this, about person first language, if you want to share a little bit more about that and why that came up for you.
Sure, thanks. So it's been a minute since I've been in college, and then the terms was special education, but all throughout my course of studies, we were constantly reminded, and we became advocates for using people first language. So instead of the blind kid, it's a child with a visual disability or whatever it was. It's making sure that whomever the person is, that it's about them, that whatever the exceptionality or the disability is not them. It is not the defining characteristic. It is a part of them, but seeing the person first. And so it was fortunate that was ingrained in me for so very long, because I know that this has been a big part of, for me, I guess we'll say, using my cis privilege and helping other people who happen to be cisgender and heterosexual largely, and no offense to anyone on this call to whom this applies, white men of a certain age, understand the language, understand the reason, and understand that, it's not about, we're hurting your inconvenience. It's seeing the people in the world for who they are. And having been privileged to be a significant somebody in the life of teens now for more decades than I thought was possible, because I'm not that old. I've always kind of viewed it when a teen has shared something with me, has come out to me, has, revealed to me who they are. My response after, are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you making good choices? Do you feel good? Is, I feel like I know more of you now. Thank you for sharing more information so I can learn the totality of you. And that's what I kind of feel like a lot of times that has been an approach that's worked for me, is like to, number one, you're being trusted, but I now see the fuller picture of you.
Awesome, thank you. Are there other things that came up that have either helped you think about like ways we can be more affirming, inclusive, equitable, seeing people with their full dignity, or things that you feel are challenging, or things that you're still thinking about or have questions about?
This group is modeling teen behavior on Zoom.
I have something that I could talk about a little bit, if that's all right. So I, as probably one of the younger people in this space right now, I'm definitely kind of engaging with the teen space and the team aspect of this a bit differently than everyone else's. A lot of people here are. So, and I guess I'm coming from a bit more knowledgeable of a standpoint, not diminishing anyone else's knowledge, just as my own personal experience as someone who does identify as LGBT and has been heavily involved with Keshet for a very long time. I'm currently not in a very large leadership position in my community. I am just a regular teacher at a Sunday school program. And kind of one of my biggest issues, and I was hoping I maybe could get some advice from those who have a bit more experience in the, educational space than me, of I know that JTEEN is specifically about teenagers, and I interact a lot with the teenagers in my program, but I'm typically placed with the younger students, as I am too close in age to the teenagers in the space, and they don't always see me as a voice of authority, which is fine. I've accepted that fact. It'll be a while till I can. But I teach second grade specifically, and I have a couple of students in my class who have either vocally in like explicit terms, or have kind of been a bit more subtle about it, expressed knowledge or questioning about the LGBT community. And there are other students who have said things that kind of paint the LGBT community in a negative light. And I'm just kind of struggling on how to support those students who may, at that age, maybe identifying or maybe questioning things without in some way alerting the parents or getting in trouble with the administration. I do live in Florida, and there is the Don't Say Gay bill here, which I know there's a bit more flexibility there within religious institutions, but there's also less at the same time. So I was just wondering if there was any way I could support those students who are at that younger age without, getting them in trouble by giving them maybe too much information that it would get passed on to their parents or anything like that. That was a little bit of a long ramble. I apologize.
You have nothing to apologize for. I think I heard a couple of different things. One is like, I think like a policy question. And I don't know if I have like a great answer for that, although Alicia and Jamie or others, if you do, like, I'm happy, like, I'd love to delve into that a little bit more. And I'm happy to also connect about that like offline or online, but on a different Zoom call, such as it is at this point in our lives. I think the other question is like, how do we as educators set certain expectations or standards in our classrooms, in the spaces that we're in? How do we say like, this is a space where we are going to respect people's identities, and we are going to respect people's pronouns as like proxies for their identities, or things like that. And also, I think something that I think about a lot is like, where are those other comments that are made that might be like when a student comes in and says like, here's makes a homophobic or transphobic comment, figuring out like, where is that coming from? Is that coming from stuff that they're hearing at school, other places, at home, right? Or is it also coming from like a certain amount of like lack of discomfort or lack of comfort and lack of like fluency with something that they're just like not exposed to and not familiar with? And that becomes harder when we are living in certain political landscapes where it becomes harder to have these conversations in like explicit and candid ways, and in ways that are developmentally appropriate. And I think that that's like a separate conversation of like actually figuring out like, where do those comments come from? And that also helps figure out like where, and that's not necessarily about like, where's the harm that's being caused, right? Because like, you could be hearing this message, or you could just be saying this because you are unfamiliar with these things, or you don't realize why it might be hurtful, and maybe helping figure that out might be part of it. But also I think like still saying like, and this is also a space where, you know, in my classroom, in our synagogue, where like we care about LGBTQ inclusion and equity and social justice and things like that. And we want to make sure that like our classrooms, and we want to make sure that like our spaces are reflective of the full diversity of the Jewish community. And that's about both gender and sexuality. It's also about racial and ethnic diversity. It's also about disability justice work. It's about so many other things that we have work to do as a community. I don't know if that fully answered the question, Danny.
No, it helped. It definitely helped. No, it did. It was, you know, it's a unique position to find yourself in, and it's definitely something that I'm going to have to do my own kind of personal reflection and research on, and have some just some personal, you know, talking with maybe my director to see what I can and can't talk about in that classroom. We had a Keshet training for so we have something called Madrahim, which are teenage like volunteers. They're the high school students who can like go to the classrooms just as teachers. And we had a 2-day long Keshet training with them, but the teachers haven't received any kind of LGBT inclusion training, which is, and I know a couple of the teachers do have that knowledge because I personally worked with them one-on-one about those things, but we haven't had like a school-wide program. And I think maybe that kind of, maybe talking to my director and maybe, you know, guys maybe can tell me if this is not a smart idea to say like, hey, is this possible? Because if more of the teachers are more aware, maybe it can make the school itself a safer space. Since I am with the younger students and we have so many older students who are going to probably be the ones who are a bit more in that space of that questioning of who they are. I think that might be the way to go. And Ami, your words definitely helped me kind of confirm that thought process I was having.
Amazing. I just wanted to add that that's exactly the way to go. That all of us as educators deserve to feel that we have the power, the permission, and the protection to really support the learning and belonging of the youth that we're working with. And so having that conversation of how can I do this in this space with these youth is so important. And I think your approach of how can we bring this to the entire school so that we're fostering conversations like this across the entire school is another fabulous way to do it, because that already like fosters a different school culture where that could be more rooted in what are hopefully values of fostering LGBTQ belonging and not the converse of that.
So with but 2-ish minutes left, a little less, 1 minute left, I want to end with one last question that we're going to put in the chat, or I want to invite people to put in the chat. And we're going to end with also sharing a couple of resources. And Alicia, I think you have, yes, I think we have some resources and a survey question. Yes. Okay, great. Thumbs up. Cool. Which is that we began by talking about times when we felt invisible or not seen by people. And then we spent a lot of time talking about terms and also sharing things between us. And I want to end by asking us all to quickly reflect on a time when we felt safe and affirmed, and what that space was. And specifically, what about that space helped us feel that way? Alicia, thank you for putting that in the chat. So just take like a couple of seconds, and if you want to just like put that space in the chat, just to share it, because part of what we are fundamentally doing is we have these experiences in our own lives of feeling invisible, of feeling like we're not fully represented, but there are also hopefully times in our lives when we feel that when we can call upon these moments of like, actually, this is what it felt like when I felt like I was fully seen. This is when I felt fully safe to be who I was. And those are both experiences that we can use to call upon as we work as we continue to do this work. So for like 10 more seconds, if you want to put something So it is now 4:31. Alicia, do you want to put some stuff in the chat and then we can?
Sure thing. I'm just going to put quickly in the chat. We mentioned a lot of resources from both Moving Traditions and Keshet. We'll quickly put them in the chat so you can grab them, but we're also going to send an email to all of you as a follow-up, but also a link if you don't mind taking a minute or two before the rest of the day gets away from you to share with us your takeaways from this session and if it met what you wanted from all of it. And I am also going to put the other resources that we mentioned. Thank you all. Thank you, Erica, for inviting us to be here, and Ami and Jamie for.
And I'm happy to stick around for another 10 if anyone wants to touch base on anything, or if you have another question, I'm here for.
I will also stick around for a few extra minutes.
Thank you all so much. I'm putting in the chat also one more time, if you're interested in getting involved in the JTEEN networking conversations, feel free to complete that form and we will follow up in the coming weeks. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ami. Thank you, Jamie. I think this is a conversation that needs to continue. While we had lots of 5s and 4s about people who were really comfortable with the language and familiarity, there's still a lot to learn, and it is fluid. It is growing, it is changing, it is evolving. And so I think to have this conversation regularly is incredibly helpful.
Absolutely.